The Los Angeles Clippers made progress this last season. They made their first conference finals in franchise history, coming back from 2-0 down in the first round versus the Dallas Mavericks, then again in round 2 versus the Utah Jazz, before forcing the Phoenix Suns to 6 games in the conference finals after once again going 2-0 down in the start of that series. And they're missing Kawhi Leonard for the whole series. And I believe if Kawhi was healthy for that Suns series, the Clippers would be in the NBA Finals. But injuries have been a massive part of this year's playoffs, so they're not the only team that have to deal with those injuries. Now, this will be a big offseason for the Clippers, with players who performed very well for them in the playoffs becoming free agents. For example, Reggie Jackson and Nicholas Batum, both were crucial parts of the Clippers team, especially Reggie Jackson. When Kawhi went down, Reggie Jackson was by far the Clippers' second best player behind Paul George, and both Nick Batum and Reggie Jackson were both on veteran minimum contracts last year, so both are definitely in line for big pay rises. But before we look at those other players, we got to talk about Kawhi Leonard, because Kawhi, he is the key to this franchise. The Clippers, if they're going to be serious title contenders, they need to have Kawhi Leonard. Now, Kawhi does have a player option this year, and whether he resigns with the Clippers or he wants to go elsewhere, I expect him to opt out of that contract, because I expect him to do it. But Kawhi is a very hard player to read. As a Lakers fan, I know how tough it is to read Kawhi. I thought in 2019 he was going to the Lakers, and he ended up going to the Clippers. I thought for sure it's either the Lakers, then maybe the Raptors, not the Clippers. I did not expect him to go to the Clippers, but he did. So he's a very hard player to read. Only him and his uncle really know what he's doing. So I'm not going to try and read what Kawhi's going to do, but I do expect him to opt out. And if I had to guess, probably re-sign with the Clippers again in probably a 1+1 deal. I don't know, whatever way he gets the most money probably, because I think he does want to stay in LA. His family lives there. He's happy there, and the organisation have done a lot for him. I think he will be he'll try to become a free agent again next year. But I expect him to stay the Clippers, yeah, because this is going to be his last big contract as well, and I think the Clippers trust him. So I think he should stay with the Clippers. He likes LA, as I said, and at 30 years old, with the injury history he has and the current injury he's dealing with his ACL injury, this is going to be his last big deal. And he's been dealing with injuries his whole way through his career, back to his San Antonio Spurs days. That's actually why he left the Spurs. He had an argument with the Spurs medical team. So injuries have been a big part of his career, and I think he's going to stay with the Clippers because he likes LA, last big contract, great weather obviously, and he's seen what the Clippers can do without him, making a conference finals, pushing the Suns to 6 games without him. Paul George showed he can definitely be a second player on the championship team. You got great players. If you can keep all Reggie Jackson, and they got some great role players as well. So I think he'll stay with the Clippers, and obviously he's very hard to read, even though he will be missing most of next season with injury. I expect him to stay on, but if he is to opt out and wants to leave the Clippers, even with him being out most of next season with injury, there'll be no shortage of teams in line for Kawhi Leonard, because look at Kevin Durant. When he had his Achilles injury, Brooklyn gave him the max contract, and they knew he'd missed 1 full year due to injury. So lots of teams will be there to give Kawhi a max contract if he opts out and wants to leave LA, but I think he'll stay at the Clippers. If not, probably go to the Heat. He does get on with Jimmy Butler, still great weather in Miami, but yeah, I expect him to stay at the Clippers. So let's look at some of the players who did well for the Clippers last year and look back at their seasons. So let's have a look at Paul George. Last season he averaged 27 points per game, 9.6 rebounds a game, 5.4 assists per game, on 34% shooting from 3 on 8 threes a game in last year's playoffs. So PG proved a lot of people wrong in this latest playoff run. As soon as Kawhi went down in Game 4 versus the Jazz, Paul George stepped up and carried this team past the Utah Jazz and into the conference finals, where he showed he can be a leader. He can lead a team for I think that was proved in that Suns series, and that he's more than capable of being a number 2 guy on a championship team. So Paul George, I think his reputation got restored in this year's playoffs. Great scores, we all know, great defender, and yeah, he even showed a bit of leadership, which surprised a few people. Pandemic P is a thing of the past. It looks like at the moment it's playoff P from here on end. It didn't sound right saying playoff P, but I think he earned that title again. So let's look at Reggie Jackson. He averaged 17.5 points per game, 3.4 assists per game, on 40% shooting from 3, on 7.6 threes a game in last year's playoffs. Now Reggie became the Clippers' number 2 guy, as I said, once Kawhi went down in that Jazz series, and he was incredible, bringing scoring and plenty of fight and energy to that Clippers team. He was their main point guard. Rajon Rondo got barely any minutes in the playoffs, and he was meant to be their third guy. Rondo was meant to be their saviour, but Reggie Jackson stepped up and he was that guy for the Clippers. Now, the problem with the Clippers is he played so well, he's probably earned himself too much money that the Clippers can't keep him. He was on a veteran minimum, as I said at the very start. He's been on a veteran minimum for the past 2 years with the Clippers. Now I think he's earned himself a massive pay rise, probably around 10 to 15 million, a full mid-level exception, and maybe even 50. Maybe a team might throw 15 million at him. You know, the chances of the Clippers re-signing him, they're not great because they don't have his bird rights to give him massive money. They can't pay him that much. But the only thing for Clippers fans to hold on to about Reggie Jackson is he did say how grateful he was to the Clippers organization. You know, he was down in the dumps. I think it was at the Pistons before the Clippers saved him. They gave him another chance this year, and he showed him he was worth taking a chance on. So maybe he might stay for that reason, but there's no way he's going to stay on for a veteran minimum with the Clippers. Maybe he might take their taxpayer $6 million deal, but I think he's going to get 10 million, maybe even 15 this offseason. He's 31 years old, he's in the prime of his career. He's got to cash in now. He's got to make that money before, he's back on a minimum when he's older. So I think, Reggie Jackson played too well that he's going to get himself out of LA. Another player, as I mentioned at the start, Nick Batum. He was also on a veteran minimum, and his career was on the ropes after getting bought out by Charlotte. But again, the Clippers took a chance on him, get him the veteran minimum deal, and I think it's more likely he stays with the Clippers. He played very well, shooting 40% from 3 on 4 threes a game for the Clippers as their stretch 4. He's another player who could be off this team. If another team comes in and offers their full mid-level exception, which is around $10 million, I can see Batum walking, but I think he's more likely to stay, as the Clippers do have a $6 million taxpayers exception, which I think he would accept for the Clippers. That's around $6 million, as I said. So I think Batum could be staying on. Reggie Jackson, I think his days as a Clipper are numbered, but the only thing for Reggie Jackson is he did say in his exit interview how grateful he was to the Clippers. So maybe there's a way of keeping Reggie and Nick Batum, but realistically, I don't think so. Lucky to keep one of them. Hopefully they will, because I think they're both great fits on that Clippers team. Both Luke Kennard and Marcus Morris both got paid last year, getting big contracts, 4 years, $64 million. Both were kind of inconsistent. Marcus Morris, he was a bigger part of the team. When he played well, the Clippers played well in the playoffs. He averaged 12.2 points per game on 37% shooting from 3 on 5 threes a game. And finishing off with the Clippers last year, Ty Lue, their head coach. There's some question marks. Is Ty Lue a step down from Doc Rivers? The Ty Lue haters would say LeBron carried him to all those finals. But I think Ty Lue showed in this year's playoffs that he can be a great coach in the playoffs, making adjustments, coming down from 2-0 twice, and get them very most out of that team, So I think Ty Lue proved he's the right decision, better than Doc Rivers, I think, in my opinion. And he did well with Ty Lue. He restored his reputation, this year with the Clippers. So now let's look at the Clippers off-season plan. You could say, what do they have this off-season? Well, they have, as I said, the $5.9 million taxpayer exception. They got the number 25 overall pick in this year's draft. Relevant free agents they got Kawhi Leonard, as I said, and Serge Ibaka. Both have player options. I expect Ibaka to opt in, Kawhi opt out, but probably stay. Another free agents, you got Reggie and Nick Batum. And then finally, you got Boogie Cousins, who also played a pretty good role for the Clippers during the playoffs. What do they really need this offseason? Another point guard if Reggie Jackson leaves. They need a Reggie Jackson replacement, and probably some more depth if other role players end up leaving. Now, we got to assume that Kawhi stays with the Clippers, because if Kawhi leaves, the whole offseason is a mess then. You got to change everything. So I'm going to assume that Kawhi Leonard stays with the Clippers, and let's look at our other players. So as I said, I expect Serge Ibaka to opt in. He has around a $10 million player option. He's now 31 years old, and he's dealt with back injuries throughout all of last season, and he will not get anywhere near that kind of money, I don't think. 31, being a 7-footer almost, and your back injuries, nah, you're not going to get 10 million. So I expect him to definitely opt in. This will leave the Clippers with only the $6 million taxpayer exception, which I think should be offered to Nick Batum, all of it, because lots of teams would be interested in him as a stretch 4. I think they even played Nick Batum as a small ball 5 for some games, but mainly a stretch 4, hit the 3, play some good defense. So yeah, I expect Nick Batum, after having a great season and played a big part of this team, I think he'll be staying on with the Clippers around $6 million. So the Clippers need to keep hold of, one Nick Batum or Reggie Jackson. I think they will keep. I think Batum is a guy I need to target, because You know, you're playing for a contending team in LA, you know, playing a big role. I think he'll be happy enough to stay with the Clippers. Reggie Jackson, though, he's a different problem altogether. As I said earlier on, he earned himself a big contract, and I can't see him staying with the Clippers as they won't have the money. But he's easily earned himself around 10 to 15 million. So good for him, you know, 31. Let's get that last paycheck, as I said earlier on. And, you know, there's some other players that they do need to move on from, like a Patrick Beverley. For sure, I think he needs to go. He's making around $13 million next season, and he's clearly declining, and he's no longer a big part of this Clippers team. Back in 2019, it was Pat Bev, it was Lou Williams, it was Montrezl Harrell, Gallinari, the main guy, Shea Gilgeous were the main guys in that Clippers team. But Pat Bev now, he's kind of served his purpose, you know. He's still a good defender, but he's pretty much non-effective on the offensive end. I think you gotta try and trade him. 13 million at 33, 34 years old. I think they need to move on from him. Rajon Rondo is another guy I think they should move on from, because he's clearly just not playing. He's meant to be the missing piece. Everyone was saying when they traded Lou Williams to Rondo that he's going to be the missing piece in the playoffs. He's going to be that third star. But it didn't work out. Reggie Jackson played so well. They didn't need Rondo. He had many DMPs, coaches' decisions in the playoffs. So I expect him to be a tradable asset, because he's making $7 million next year. And you could put that along with Patrick Beverley and maybe even Patrick Patterson next year, and then you've over 20 million in salaries there, which they could go after a point guard replacement like a Kyle Lowry or Lonzo Ball. I think both would be great fits if they could somehow get either of those two to join the Clippers. You know, imagine having a big three of Lowry, Paul George, and Kawhi Leonard, obviously. Or you could have Lonzo, a young point guard, who I think would fit well. Either of them would fit well with the Clippers. Or they could even go all out and try and get a third star with those contracts, like a DeMar DeRozan in a sign and trade. And you know, strange things have happened, you know. But I think the Clippers just need to, as I said, this offseason, try and get that good point guard replacement for Reggie Jackson. Keep hold of Batum, and then just bring in some good role players. I don't know, more 3-and-D players, whatever they need. They're a great 3-point shooting team last year, so they don't struggle on that end of the court. But yeah, just get a good point guard replacement for Reggie. Keep Nick Batum. I think they'll be fine, you know. They got a strong, solid team. So overall, the Clippers have restored their reputation. Pandemic P is a thing of the past, as I said. Ty Lue proved to be the right coach, and they were also proved right on letting go of Montrezl Harrell last year. A lot of people said, why are they doing letting Trez go to the Lakers? Trez proved with the Lakers that he doesn't fit with a lot of teams, you know, especially in the playoffs. So they made the right move on that as well, and not a lot of people are talking about that. You know, as I said, they got criticised a lot for letting Trez walk. I think that was the right decision. Now, assuming Kawhi stays as a Clipper, they're only 1 or 2 pieces off winning a championship. A point guard and maybe one other key position. I don't know. The Clippers fans know better than me. Well, they got good depth everywhere. You got good centers and Zubats, Ibaka, Boogie, if you want to keep hold of him. They're pretty stacked, this Clippers team. That's why I'm saying they're only 1 or 2 pieces off winning a championship. And it's unsure how long Kawhi will be out for next season. People are saying probably most of next season, which probably means with his ACL injury, probably means next season will be a bit of a write-off for the Clippers. They'll still make the playoffs with Paul George. You know, he proved he can carry a team for, you know, an extended period. But without Reggie Jackson, could they? I don't know how far they can go in the playoffs. So next season might be a bit of a write-off. But if you can keep Kawhi, you have Paul George, you have other great role players like a Marcus Morris, like a Zubac, like a Nick Batum, hopefully keep hold of him, a Luke Kennard, even young Terrence Mann. He got 37 points against the Jazz in a closeout game, so he's shown his potential. So, you know, the Clippers, they're not far off, and as I said, they're one of the best 3-point shooting teams in the league. They've solid defense, and if you can shoot the 3 and play some good defense, you've got a chance, a fighter's chance. And you got 2 stars like Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. You're going to be contenders for this foreseeable future. So yeah, I think the Clippers do have a bright enough future, even though Kawhi is injured. I expect him to stay. But anyway, Clippers fans, you tell me, who do you think you need to get in this offseason? I'm saying a point guard as a replacement for Reggie Jackson. What other positions do you think need to fill in to really become real contenders? Now, obviously, we all know with Kawhi's injury, maybe next year mightn't be the year for the Clippers. But, you know, Paul George and Kawhi Leonard aren't 35, 36. They're in their early 30s. You still got time. So tell me what positions are you looking for this offseason? And how are you feeling going into next season with Kawhi's injury? But you did see Paul George step up. But anyway, guys, that's the video. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like the video, subscribe if you're new, and turn on notifications, stay notified. And with all that said, I'm out of here.